Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, always fun to dive into a new topic.
Today we're going to crank it up. We're talking high-end audio.
Well, here we go.
The gear, the jargon, the price tags that'll make your jaw drop.
A world of passionate opinions, that's for sure.
And where subjective experiences like, I hear a difference, clash with those cold, hard measurements.
That's what makes this whole thing so interesting, right?
We're tackling this question from audiophile blogger Archimago. Why do people equate high-end audio with snake oil?
He's got some thoughts on this, that's for sure.
He even has this whole system, dubiousness class ratings, from slightly sus to like, did you really just say that?
I like it. DC ratings for audiophile gear. What's the scale?
He starts with Class A audio snake oil products.
Okay, lay it on us.
These are the gadgets, the tweaks that, well, they kind of seem like they defy logic.
Like what? Give me an example.
CD demagnetizers, to like realign the music molecules or something.
But seriously, people buy those. And get this, special rocks for your listening room.
Okay, you're making that up.
I wish I was. They claim it it improves the acoustics somehow.
Some next level audiophile voodoo right there.
And then there are those green pens for your CDs.
I've seen those. Do they like re-etch the pits on the disc?
Something like that. It's wild.
So we're talking about stuff that sounds like it's straight out of a carnival barker's playbook.
Exactly. But instead of selling you miracle tonics, they're peddling audio nirvana.
It makes you wonder, how did we even get here?
Why is the audiophile world so full of these outlandish claims?
Well, the term snake oil itself has a pretty interesting history. The original stuff, believe it or not, came from traditional Chinese medicine.
Wait, really? Actual snakes?
Actual snake extract. It might even had some genuine medicinal properties. Who knows?
So how did it become the go-to term for scams and bogus products?
Marketing, my friend.
Well,
when snake oil hit the Western world, savvy salesmen saw a golden opportunity.
Ah, the power of a good story.
They started hawking their versions, but these were often just mineral oils, some herbs, and a whole lot of hype.
So basically, the snake oil being sold back in the day was a placebo.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Take Clark Stanley, for instance. He was a showman who sold his snake oil at the 1893 World's Fair.
The World's Fair? Like the one with the Ferris wheel?
That's the one. He even went as far as dissecting snakes in front of the crowds to prove it was legit. Pure theater.
People love a good show.
It all boils down to that human desire for a quick fix, a secret remedy. We see it everywhere, not just in audio.
It's the allure of easy solutions, especially for things we're passionate about, like health or, our audio setups.
Exactly. The promise of unlocking some hidden potential, of hearing details we've never noticed before, it's tempting.
Totally. And it makes sense why people might fall for these dubiousness class products. They're promising you the moon and the stars.
Right. But it's not just about the gadgets themselves. Archimago also calls out some of the marketing tactics used to sell high-end audio gear.
Oh yeah, it gets sneaky sometimes. What are some of those red flags listeners should be on the lookout for, especially when it comes to this less obvious audiophile snake oil?
One thing he points out is this heavy reliance on subjective reviews as proof of quality. We see it with everything from cables to fancy amplifiers.
It's like, how much can you really trust someone's opinion when their system probably costs more than my car?
That's a thing, isn't it? It makes you question, if a product measures poorly in objective tests but gets glowing subjective reviews, what are we really evaluating?
It's like saying a car is amazing because of its heated seats and fancy sound system, even though the engine barely runs.
Precisely. You've got to look under the hood, so to speak. Archimago gives this great example of a $17,000 boutique DAC. Despite the price tag, it had a THD plus N of negative 90 dB.
Hold on, rewind that. THD plus N, what is that and why should I care?
It's basically a measure of distortion. Lower's better, and negative 90 dB is actually worse than a lot of DACs you can get for under $200.
So this $17,000 piece of gear is, performing worse than something that costs a tenth of the price?
And it had some serious jitter issues, too.
Jitter. Now that's a new one.
Think of it like timing errors in the digital audio signal. It can make the sound, kind of muddled.
So we've got this pricey DAC, worse than average measurements, but wait, it gets rave reviews in some audiophile magazines. Am I missing something?
That's the million-dollar question. It brings us right back to this battle between subjective experience and objective measurements.
The age-old debate, do we listen with our ears or our wallets?
Or maybe a little bit of both. I mean, we can't deny that we're influenced by what we see, what we read, A fancy brand, a sleek design, it all plays a role.
Totally. But at what point does that cross the line into snake oil?
And that's where Archimago's categories get really interesting. He's not saying there's anything wrong with enjoying the aesthetics of expensive audio gear, but he's calling for more honesty in the industry.
Honesty and maybe a reality check.
Like, that $3,000 audio cable might look impressive, but is it truly offering a sonic improvement that justifies the cost? Or are we paying for the placebo effect, the feeling of exclusivity?
Okay, so we've got this whole web of marketing hype, subjective reviews, objective measurements, and then there's the psychology of it all. It's a lot to unpack. But before we really dive into that rabbit hole, let's talk about something a bit more tangible. Cables.
Ah, yes, cables.
Yeah.
The perennial hot topic of the audiophile world. They really embody this whole tension between science and subjective experience.
It can be a real head scratcher, right? Especially when you start looking at some of the claims companies make.
Oh yeah, we're talking cryogenically treated cables that supposedly align the molecular structure for optimal signal flow.
Don't forget those directional cables, you know, the ones that only work if you plug them in a certain way. Like, electricity cares which way is up.
I know, it's like, do electrons even have a preferred direction of travel?
It's enough to make your head spin. Full disclosure, I totally fell for the cryogenic cable thing once. Spoiler alert. My system didn't magically transform into Carnegie Hall.
You and me both. The marketing is strong with these ones. And those are just the Class A contenders, the really out there stuff.
Right, and then you've got the Class B cables, you know, they're all about fancy materials and construction techniques.
Oh yeah, the silver-plated, oxygen-free copper, woven by Tibetan monks under a full moon kind of cables.
Exactly. They might measure a tiny bit better in terms of resistance or capacitance, but do those differences actually translate into something you can hear? Debatable.
That's the gray area, right? Where legitimate innovation starts to look a lot like clever marketing.
It's kind of like those performance air filters you can get for your car.
Yeah.
Sure, they might give you a minuscule edge in a lab setting, but in the real world, are you really going to notice? Probably not.
Exactly. And then, of course, we have the Class C cable royalty.
Ah, yes. The audio jewelry.
Draped in luxurious sheathing, adorned with gold-plated connectors, they look like they belong in a museum.
And the price tags. We're talking a month's rent, maybe even a down payment on a car for a few feet of wire.
It's wild. But as Archimago points out, there's often very little evidence to suggest these high-end cables sound any better than a well-made but far more affordable alternative.
It all comes back to that question, are we paying for actual improvements in sound quality or just the perception of luxury and exclusivity?
It's a tough one. And there's no easy answer. It often boils down to individual priorities and how much you're willing to spend.
Right. If you've got money to burn and you love the way those fancy cables look, go for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Archimago argues for more transparency. Instead of relying on this vague technical jargon and subjective reviews, why not focus on measurable differences? Let the listeners decide for themselves.
Empowering the consumer. I like it. But before we move on from cables, you mentioned accessory creep earlier, and I think that's a whole other can of worms we need to open.
Ah, yes. Accessory creep. The audiophile's slippery slope. It starts with one little upgrade, maybe a new cable, or a fancy power conditioner.
And then suddenly you're convinced you need to buy every little gadget and tweak under the sun to squeeze out that last drop of sonic perfection.
It's like an addiction. You're chasing that next hit of audiophile bliss.
Like that Simpsons episode where Homer keeps buying a bigger and bigger TV. At a certain point, you got to ask yourself, are you really improving the experience or are you just trying to fill some kind of void?
Right, and it speaks to this psychological aspect of the hobby. We're hardwired to find patterns, to seek out order and meaning.
And music, it just hits us differently, right? It's emotional, powerful. It's no wonder we crave that perfect listening experience.
It's like we're trying to find a sonic reflection of ourselves in our systems.
Okay, I'm feeling all philosophical now. But let's shift gears a bit. We've got to talk about MQA.
Ah, yes. MQA, or Master Quality Authenticated, the technology that was supposed to revolutionize high-resolution audio streaming.
The promise was huge. Master quality sound in a smaller file size. It sounded almost too good to be true.
Right. And as we discussed earlier, Archimago is not convinced. He sees MQA as another potential contender for the Snake Oil Hall of Fame.
Especially with that study from McGill University that found no real difference in sound quality between MQA and regular high-resolution audio files.
Yeah, that study definitely raised some eyebrows. And then there's the company's history. They've made some pretty bold claims over the years, and not all of them have held up to scrutiny.
Like that whole thing about MQA being a lossless format.
Yeah, some people have accused them of using lossy compression techniques, which seems a bit, I don't know, misleading.
Yeah, misleading is one way to put it, but it makes you think, if the benefits are so debatable, why even bother? What's the motivation behind pushing a technology that, according to some, doesn't really deliver?
Well, remember, MQA isn't just some tech experiment, it's a business. And like any business, there's pressure to create a demand, to make people feel like they need what you're selling, even if it means bending the truth a little.
So it's not enough to have a good product. You gotta convince people they can't live without it. It all feels a bit, I don't know, icky, doesn't it?
It does make you question things, and it highlights something important about this whole snake oil thing in the audiophile world. It's not always about outright lies or scams. Sometimes it's more about, like, blurring the lines, creating this narrative that's more about perception than reality.
Playing on those deep-seated desires. In audiophilia, it's that yearning for the ultimate listening experience, even if it means ignoring a few inconvenient truths. Which brings us back to Archimago and his call for, what, a more discerning ear?
He wants us to be smarter consumers, to look beyond the shiny marketing and really dig into the claims, ask those tough questions.
Like, does this fancy cable really do what it says it does? Is there any real proof, or is it just a bunch of audiophile jargon?
Right, and when you see buzzwords like quantum or synergy thrown around, maybe take it with a grain of salt.
A healthy dose of skepticism is never a bad thing, especially in the world of high-end audio where things can get, well, a little subjective. It's great to be passionate about sound, to appreciate craftsmanship, but let's not get so caught up that we lose sight of, reality.
Exactly, it's about finding that balance, enjoying the hobby, but also making informed choices.
So how do we do that? How do we navigate this maze of audiophile goodies and potential traps?
Remember why we started this journey in the first place. It's about the music. That's what should matter most. Let's get lost in the music. Let it move us, challenge us. The gear is just a tool to help us do that.
Well said. The real magic happens between our ears.
It's about how we listen, how we connect with the music.
It's not about chasing the next expensive upgrade. It's about appreciating the nuances, the beauty of sound itself. And sometimes that means tuning out the noise, both literally and figuratively.
Couldn't agree more.
And on that note, we'll leave you all to ponder that. Until next time, happy listening.